10 years. A marriage I thought was built on trust. But one phone call from Dorian shattered everything. Pack your things and get out. No explanation. No second chances. What I discovered next. It was worse than I ever imagined. Stay tuned. The world I thought I knew came crashing down in an instant. I had spent 10 years building a life with Dorian, my husband, believing we were partners in every sense of the word. But then, one phone call shattered everything. Pack your things and get out. Just like that, no explanation, no warning. My heart dropped, my mind raced, and I could hardly comprehend what was happening. The man I had shared my life with, my home, my dreams, suddenly turned into a stranger. The coldness in his voice was a stark contrast to the warmth I once knew, and as the words sank in, a deep wave of disbelief washed over me. For 10 years, I had lived under the illusion of a perfect marriage. But now, I saw it for what it really was, an elaborate lie, carefully constructed to keep me in the dark. Our love, our home, even our finances were all part of a facade. The reality was too much to bear. I felt betrayed, not just by Dorian, but by the very foundation of the life I had built. The woman I thought I was, the life I thought I was living, it all felt like a cruel joke. How could this happen? How had I been so blind? I thought I knew him. I thought I understood what we had. How could it all crumble so easily? But the shock of his words wasn't the worst part. What hurt more was the realization that everything had been orchestrated from the start. I wasn't just losing a marriage, I was losing the very control I thought I had over my life. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have ever imagined. And as if the sting of that truth wasn't enough, Dorian told me to speak to his parents for answers. I thought perhaps they could shed some light on his sudden cruelty, but what I uncovered would change everything. The phone call ended, leaving me standing in a hollow silence, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of the chaos that had just erupted in my life. But in that moment, as my mind scrambled to piece together the fragments of what had just been shattered, something deep inside me stirred. The man I thought I knew was gone, and in his place stood a person I could hardly recognize. What came next, however, would open my eyes to a truth I never saw coming. A truth that would set the stage for everything that followed. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of his words hanging in the air. I wanted to call him back, to scream, to demand an explanation, but the numbness in my fingers made it impossible to dial. I didn't even know where to begin. The reality of the situation was still sinking in. My life, the marriage I thought was solid, everything I believed in, had been a carefully constructed lie. It was a feeling I could barely comprehend, let alone face. And yet, there I was, standing in the middle of a shattered world, trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces. The next few hours felt like a blur. I walked around the apartment, my feet heavy with the burden of a future I never expected. The walls that once felt like home now felt suffocating, the air thick with the residue of betrayal. The echoes of the life we had built together reverberated in my mind, each memory now tainted with the bitter realization that I had been living a lie. The house, our house, felt empty now, as though the space itself had lost its purpose. I ran my hands along the furniture, the same furniture Dorian and I had picked out together, and it suddenly seemed foreign. The comfort I had once felt here was gone, replaced by the cold, aching emptiness of reality. I knew I couldn't stay here forever. I had to make sense of everything. I had to find a way forward, even though every part of me wanted to shut down and bury my head in the sand. But I couldn't. Something inside me refused to let go completely. Something told me I had to fight, not for Dorian, but for myself. For my own future. I couldn't just let him take everything from me. Serena stood frozen, staring at the phone in her hand as the words echoed in her mind. What had just happened? It was as if a tidal wave had hit her, sweeping away everything she had known. Her mind struggled to process the sudden change. She thought she knew Dorian, thought they shared something genuine. But this sudden betrayal felt like a cold slap across her face, and her entire world crumbled around her. What had seemed like a solid foundation, a decade of shared memories, suddenly felt like nothing more than a house of cards, ready to topple. After the phone call, a hollow silence filled the room. Serena had always been able to count on the comfort of her home, but now, it felt foreign, like a place she no longer belonged. The walls seemed to close in on her, suffocating her with the weight of unanswered questions. What had she missed? How had she been so blind? Her thoughts raced as she sat in the midst of a life she didn't recognize. Every corner of the apartment seemed to mock her, reminding her of what once was. The kitchen they had designed together, the pictures on the walls that told the story of a life she now knew wasn't hers to claim. Every step she took felt heavier, each room echoing with the ghost of a future that would never come. The next few days were a blur of confusion and disbelief. Serena couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that there had been cracks in the foundation long before this moment. And yet, she had ignored them. The long nights when Dorian was distant, the unexplained absences, the coldness that seemed to creep in unnoticed. There were whispers in her mind now, the things she had overlooked, the moments she had dismissed. The way he had begun to withdraw, no, she hadn't imagined it. But the worst part was yet to come. In her desperation for answers, Serena found herself being directed to Dorian's parents. At first, she thought they might offer some clarity, some explanation for his sudden cruelty. But the more she spoke to them, the more she realized the truth. Dorian's family had been pulling the strings all along. They were not the supportive in-laws she had hoped for, they were part of the grand design that had manipulated her every step of the way. Dorian's parents were cold, calculating. Their demeanor was almost detached, as if they viewed her as an obstacle, not a person. Eleanor, Dorian's mother, was particularly aloof, offering no sympathy, only sharp words laced with condescension. Her gaze never softened, as if Serena were merely a thing that needed to be disposed of, not a wife. Bernard, Dorian's father, barely acknowledged her presence, his indifference palpable. It was clear that they had never accepted her, and now, it became evident why. She wasn't family, she had been a pawn. Serena tried to ask about Dorian's sudden behavior, expecting an explanation that would make sense of the turmoil, but instead, they only gave vague answers, as if her feelings didn't matter. The revelation hit Serena like a lightning bolt. Her entire marriage, her life with Dorian, had been nothing more than a carefully constructed game. They had used her, manipulated her emotions, and kept her in the dark. The love she thought they shared had been a facade. What they really cared about was control over their wealth, their image, their plans for the future. Serena had been a pawn in their game, a means to an end. She wasn't the wife they had accepted into their family, but a player to be discarded when no longer useful. The betrayal stung deeper than any words could express. She had been so sure of the life they had built together, so certain that their bond was genuine. But now, everything she had trusted seemed like a lie. The realization that she had never truly been a part of Dorian's family, that she had been nothing more than a tool for their manipulations, left her reeling. There had been no love in this marriage, just a meticulously crafted arrangement designed to benefit them at her expense. The pain of this discovery was overwhelming. She had been so sure that they were a family, that she belonged. But now, she saw it all for what it really was, a carefully laid trap. But it wasn't just the emotional betrayal that cut the deepest. It was the discovery of the hidden financial agendas. Serena's thoughts turned to the finances that had always seemed so stable, so secure. They had lived in a beautiful home, with a lifestyle that felt effortlessly perfect, but now, she realized that every penny had been carefully controlled, every investment carefully selected to keep her in the dark. The house she thought she had helped build was part of their plan to manipulate her, to ensure she was financially dependent on them, unable to leave without losing everything. Serena began to piece together the clues, the mysterious business deals, the sudden withdrawals, the way Dorian had always controlled their money. How many times had he dismissed her questions about their finances, telling her to trust him, that everything was fine? Now, Serena could see that nothing had been fine. She had been kept in the dark on purpose, shielded from the reality of their financial control. The anger began to bubble up inside her. How could she have been so blind? How could she have trusted them, especially Dorian, with everything? As she dug deeper, the scope of the deception became clearer. It wasn't just Dorian who had been involved in the manipulation, it was his entire family. They had orchestrated everything from the beginning, controlling the narrative, pulling the strings, and ensuring that Serena remained in the dark. Every aspect of her life had been carefully monitored, manipulated, and guided by their hands. And as the pieces fell into place, the weight of the truth became almost unbearable. She wasn't just losing her husband, she was losing her entire sense of self. The life she had built, the identity she had crafted, was all a lie. She had been playing a role in a story written by someone else, a story that had nothing to do with the life she had dreamed of. Yet, in the midst of the heartbreak and betrayal, something stirred within Serena. She wasn't just going to accept this fate. She had been manipulated, yes, but she wasn't going to let them win. Serena was no longer a victim in this story, she was determined to take control of her life. She had to confront Dorian, confront his family, and uncover the truth behind the manipulation. Her heart ached with the pain of betrayal, but there was a spark of defiance within her, a fire that refused to be extinguished. She would not be silenced. She would not be discarded so easily. Serena was going to find out the truth, no matter how deep the deception ran. And she was going to fight back. This was no longer just about a failed marriage. It was about reclaiming her life, her power, and her future. It was in that moment, with her heart full of raw emotion and her mind set on uncovering the truth, that she realized the next step in her journey. She had to find the answers, no matter where they led. But what she didn't know was that these answers would open a door to a much bigger web of lies, one that would change everything she thought she knew about herself and the man she had loved. The truth was out there, and Serena was ready to face it head-on. Serena stood up, her decision made. She was ready to confront Dorian's parents. She was ready to face whatever they had to say. And as she left the room, she couldn't help but wonder, what had she truly been a part of all these years? The answers she was about to uncover would change everything. Serena's heart pounded in her chest, each beat a stark reminder of the reality she was now facing. The words she had heard, coming from the man she had once trusted above all others, echoed in her mind, "Pack your things and get out." A simple, cruel statement, yet one that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. She had spent 10 years with Dorian, building a life together, or so she thought. But now, standing alone in the aftermath of his betrayal, Serena realized that everything she had believed about their marriage was a lie. The initial shock of the phone call began to fade, replaced by a gnawing emptiness. What had happened? How could Dorian, her husband, her partner, suddenly turn into someone unrecognizable? For years, Serena had believed their life together was built on love and mutual respect. But as the harsh reality set in, she began to understand that what they had was not a partnership, but a calculated arrangement designed to trap her. In the weeks that followed, Serena's search for answers led her to Dorian's parents. At first, she hoped they might provide some insight into what had caused their son's sudden cruelty. She naively believed they might offer some comfort, perhaps an explanation. But instead of the support she had expected, she found coldness and indifference. Dorian's parents, Eleanor and Bernard, had never truly accepted her. They had always kept their distance, but now, that distance felt like a deliberate barrier, built to keep her from seeing the truth. As Serena sat across from them, her heart heavy with confusion and betrayal, the truth began to unravel. Eleanor, Dorian's mother, spoke with a calmness that only made Serena's anger burn hotter. There was no empathy in her voice, only a sharp, detached tone that made Serena feel more like a business transaction than a loved one. Eleanor spoke of the marriage as if it were nothing more than a strategic move, a way to solidify their family's position, their wealth, their reputation. To them, Serena was not a wife, not a partner, she was simply a means to an end. And Bernard, Dorian's father, barely acknowledged her presence. His indifference was palpable, a silent confirmation that Serena had never truly been a part of the family. The realization hit Serena like a lightning bolt. Everything, the life she thought they had built, the love she thought they had shared, was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated charade. Dorian and his family had used her, manipulated her emotions, and kept her in the dark for years. She had been a pawn in their game, a tool to secure their financial empire, a woman to be controlled, not loved. Her entire life had been nothing more than a contract, and it wasn't one she had ever signed willingly. The discovery of the prenuptial agreement was the final blow. Serena had always trusted Dorian, believed in the vows they had made to each other. But now, as she uncovered the causes of the prenup, she realized how deeply she had been deceived. The contract, which Dorian had insisted they sign before their wedding, was designed to trap her financially, to ensure that she would have nothing if their marriage ended. The terms were harsh, far harsher than Serena had ever imagined. Dorian's wealth, his assets, everything they had built together, was protected by this agreement, while Serena was left with nothing. If their marriage ended, she would walk away with little more than the emotional scars of a decade-long betrayal. Serena's anger flared as she read through the prenup. It was a deliberate act of control, a way for Dorian to ensure that he remained the one with power, with the money, with the control. The emotional toll of this realization was crushing. How could she have been so blind? How had she trusted a man who had never truly been invested in her, who had used her for his own gain? Every smile, every kiss, every promise now felt like a lie, a performance meant to keep her in line, to keep her in the dark. As she sat there, staring at the documents in front of her, Serena felt a deep sense of betrayal. The marriage she had thought was built on mutual love and respect had been nothing more than a contract, a strategic partnership in which she had never truly been a partner. The emotional manipulation, the control over their finances, the constant undermining of her autonomy, all of it had been planned from the start. Dorian and his family had orchestrated this entire charade, and she had been the unwitting player in their game. But as the weight of the truth settled over her, something else began to rise within Serena, a fierce determination. She had been trapped, yes, but she wasn't going to let them win. She wasn't going to let Dorian and his family walk away unscathed, leaving her to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She would fight back. She would expose the lies, the manipulation, and the deceit. The prenuptial agreement was just the beginning. It was the key to unlocking the full extent of Dorian's betrayal, and Serena was determined to use it to her advantage. Her heart burned with a renewed sense of purpose. She was no longer a victim. She had been deceived, but she would not let that define her. She would take back control of her life, her future, and her finances. The battle was just beginning, and Serena was ready to fight for everything she deserved. In that moment, Serena knew that her journey was far from over. She had uncovered the first layer of the deception, but there was still so much more to learn, so much more to expose. And with each new revelation, Serena would grow stronger, more determined, and more certain that she would not let Dorian or his family get away with their lies. The truth would come out, no matter what. And when it did, everything would change. Serena had always believed in the strength of love and the partnership it created within a marriage. She and Ethan had built their life together, or so she thought. The years of shared memories, laughter, and mutual trust had formed the basis of what she believed was a solid foundation. But as the cracks in their relationship began to deepen, Serena was forced to confront the harsh reality that their bond was not based on love, but on something far darker. The moment she discovered the prenuptial agreement was the breaking point. As she sat alone in their shared office, the weight of the documents she had unearthed hit her with such force that it felt as though the world had come crashing down. Hidden within financial statements and business contracts was a legal document that outlined the terms of her marriage, a contract that was designed to protect Ethan and his family, while leaving her vulnerable and financially dependent. This was not a partnership, this was a calculated move to ensure her subjugation. Serena was nothing more than a carefully controlled asset in Ethan's game of wealth and power. Confused and angry, Serena sought the advice of Olivia Grant, a seasoned family law attorney known for her expertise in divorce and prenuptial agreements. As Serena recounted the betrayal she had endured, her voice shook with a mix of rage and disbelief. Olivia listened intently, her face hardening with each word. This prenuptial agreement, Olivia said firmly, was designed to entrap you. Ethan knew exactly what he was doing. But the good news is, we can fight this. With Olivia's guidance, Serena began to take charge of her own destiny. She pored over the prenup with a new perspective, analyzing each clause that had been strategically placed to benefit Ethan and his family, and began to see the full scope of the manipulation she had been subjected to. The agreement's harsh stipulations, such as leaving her with almost nothing in the event of a divorce, confirmed her worst fears. But the true betrayal wasn't just in the financial manipulation. It was in the realization that Ethan had never seen her as an equal. The love she had thought they shared was merely a facade, a means to an end. But Serena wasn't going to sit idly by and let Ethan win. Empowered by Olivia's legal advice, she began to take action. She reached out to forensic accountants to trace hidden assets, began documenting every detail of Ethan's behavior, and made strategic decisions about her next steps. Each discovery she made was like peeling back another layer of the deception. As she navigated the legal process, she came to realize that Ethan's manipulation was not unique, there were others like her, and one story in particular caught her attention. Serena learned about Nicholas Avery, a man who had been manipulated into a similar situation by his former partner. Nicholas had signed a prenuptial agreement that appeared fair at first but turned out to be a trap designed to benefit his partner if the marriage ended. Like Serena, Nicholas had trusted someone he loved, only to have that trust betrayed. His case had been a turning point in the legal world, setting a precedent for those who were manipulated into signing unfair contracts. Nicholas had fought back and won, and his victory gave Serena the strength to believe that she too could reclaim her life. The discovery of Nicholas's case was a catalyst. Serena